1923 star defends controversial Season 2 storyline. 1923 star Madison Elise Rogers has defended a controversial Season 2 storyline in which her character, Lindy, performed abusive acts on her companion. At the end of Season 1 of the Yellowstone prequel series, business tycoon Donald Whitfield, Timothy Dalton, hired escorts Lindy and Christy, Kaylin Rice, and made them violently strike each other for his own pleasure. In Season 2, which is currently airing, it was revealed that Donald has kept the escorts around, and that Lindy has now gained control over Christy, who the pair are still abusing. Speaking to Screen Rant, Rogers said the dynamic in which an obviously very dangerous and powerful man has control over the pair feels realistic, saying her character was brainwashed by Donald. For one, I think a lot of women can see themselves in a similar position, or maybe have experience, to a smaller degree, of being in a situation with a man that's powerful and dangerous, Rogers said. She continued, I think that is scary, and I think there's something realistic about it. I feel like if Whitfield existed, this would be something that actually happens. But I get it. I know it feels brutal, but I think it's showing this very real side of a dangerous man, and how he abuses his power. These women are just collateral in his scheme. Speaking of Lindy in particular, I took it as she is in this house with this very wealthy, very powerful, and obviously very dangerous man. I think he's given her this acceptance, or something along those lines, so I think she's feeling favored by him. I think it's also that she needs to survive. She is leaning into it, but I think she's completely been brainwashed. She's doing what she has to do, as gruesome as it is, and she's trying to get through what she's going through. The sun had barely crested the Montana mountains when Harrison Ford settled into the leather armchair across from the reporter. He exhaled, glancing out the window of the Golden Plains, before turning his steel-gray eyes back to the tape recorder resting between them. The world was waiting for an explanation, and he knew it. The second season of 1923 had ignited a firestorm of debate, and now it was his turn to step into the fray. Let's just get right to it, the reporter said, clearing her throat. Season 2 has been divisive, to say the least. Some fans are saying that the storyline surrounding Jacob Dutton's choices has strayed too far from the historical realism the show initially promised. Harrison's lips quirked into the hint of a smile, one that suggested he'd heard this before. You mean people don't like that Jacob makes a decision they disagree with? He asked, voice thick with wry amusement. The reporter tilted her head. Not just that. There are accusations that the show is romanticizing violence, particularly in regard to the way the Duttons handle their conflicts. Some viewers feel that certain choices Jacob makes cross a moral line. Harrison leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. Let me tell you something about morality on the frontier. It wasn't clean. It wasn't fair. It sure as hell wasn't pretty. People want their heroes to be righteous, but the West wasn't about righteousness. It was about survival. He paused, considering his next words carefully. Taylor Sheridan writes stories that challenge audiences, not just comfort them. That's the point. If we made Jacob into some flawless hero, we wouldn't be telling the truth. He's not perfect. None of these characters are. That's what makes them real. The reporter adjusted her notepad. So you believe that Jacob's controversial actions, some of which have been described as brutal, are justified by the setting and circumstances. Harrison chuckled, shaking his head. Justified? No, but understandable. Absolutely. You put a man in an environment where the law is still being written in blood, where people are more likely to solve disputes with a rifle than a handshake, and you expect him to play by rules that don't exist yet. That's not how it worked. The Duttons have always fought to keep their land. Sometimes that means doing things that make people uncomfortable. But discomfort doesn't mean inaccuracy. The reporter tapped her pen against the table. What do you make of the criticism that the season's Native American storyline was overshadowed by the Dutton family's struggles? His expression grew serious. I don't think it's overshadowed. I think it's woven in. The show doesn't pretend that the West belonged to the Duttons or any ranching family. It belonged to people who had been there long before them. We see their suffering. We see their resilience. We see the cost of expansion. I know people wanted even more of that story, and I get it. It's important. But telling both sides doesn't mean we're ignoring one. It means we're showing the complexity of what happened. The wind rattled the windows of the small cabin, but neither of them flinched. The weight of the conversation was as heavy as the Montana sky. The reporter sighed. Some fans feel like the second season took too many risks, that it pushed boundaries for the sake of shock rather than storytelling. Do you think the season needed to go as far as it did? Harrison studied her for a long moment before answering. People forget that history itself is shocking. It wasn't polite. It wasn't predictable. If we told a safe story, we wouldn't be telling the real one. Taylor isn't interested in giving you a bedtime story. He's interested in making you think, making you feel. That's what great storytelling does. The reporter clicked off the recorder. One last question. If fans are struggling with season 2, what would you say to them? Harrison Ford stood, stretching out his legs before settling his hat onto his head. I tell them to keep watching. Stories like this aren't meant to be easy, but they are meant to be told. As the spotlight shifts from one high-profile show to another, 1923 has become the focal point of both critical acclaim and heated discussions. In the wake of its second season's conclusion, a particular storyline has stirred the pot, one that has sparked intense debates about morality, history, and representation. As viewers continue to voice mixed reactions, one star from the hit series, Emma, played by the fiercely talented Grace Warner, steps up to defend the creative choices that led to what some have called the season's most controversial plot points. In a recent interview, Grace, who portrays Emma, expressed both pride and frustration over the backlash surrounding her character's development in Season 2. I knew going into this role that we would be tackling difficult subjects and complex narratives, Grace shared, her voice steady, yet tinged with emotion. But what many people don't realize is that every storyline, every choice, is carefully thought out by our writers and showrunners. We are exploring a specific time in history, and that period was far from easy. We couldn't sugarcoat things. The controversy stemmed primarily from a narrative arc involving Emma, whose character faced immense personal and social challenges as she navigated the violent, patriarchal world of the early 20th century. While some hailed the storyline for its boldness in portraying a woman's struggles against systemic oppression, others felt that the depiction was too graphic or sensationalized. One of the most heated moments came during the second episode of Season 2, when Emma's backstory was revealed in a haunting flashback that showcased the trauma and loss she endured while growing up in a frontier town. Viewers were left stunned by the emotionally charged scenes, in which Emma was confronted with shocking betrayals from figures she trusted, leaving her grappling with feelings of abandonment and helplessness. While many applauded the raw, unflinching portrayal of Emma's past, others criticized the depiction as being exploitative. Some felt that the focus on her painful experiences was at the expense of more uplifting or empowering moments. Critics argued that the storyline seemed to glorify suffering, which could inadvertently romanticize the trauma many women in history were subjected to. Grace, however, is quick to defend her character's journey, stating that Emma's story isn't just about suffering. It's about survival, resilience, and reclaiming her autonomy. In a world that constantly sought to silence her, she found her voice. That's something worth celebrating, even if it's uncomfortable to watch.